Okay, so in terms of the research that I do, so I'll just give you some background. So my academic background is in history. I've got a PhD in history. I previously worked as an editor, but I'm now based in the Life Management School at York. My research, I work with both historians and with life management scholars, and the big project I'm working on at the moment, which I want to talk about here, just briefly introduce it, is basically it's the kind of history of how organizations have celebrated their kind of own anniversaries, so 10 years, 50 years, etc. This is a project that looks at the UK and the US. It's involved a lot of archival research in business archives, both here and in the US, and interviews with former archivists, PR managers, etc. Amongst the sort of things we're exploring is obviously kind of how organizations have chosen to celebrate their own anniversaries, how that's changed over time, what strategic objectives organizations are trying to use with these activities or to achieve, and lessons we can take from sort of past examples of good and also bad examples of how organizations have chosen to celebrate their kind of own anniversaries. So why I wanted to introduce this project here, this has been going on for a few years now, working with scholars in other management schools, both in Britain and the US. And, over the last few years, we've basically built up this huge kind of data set, stretching back to the 1950s, of the different ways that all that kind of businesses, but also sort of local organizations, not-for-profit groups, have chosen to celebrate their own anniversaries. This has involved working with other scholars, as I said, but we've also started working recently with archive groups and with other sort of libraries here in the UK and the US. And basically why I wanted to sort of briefly introduce this research here is we've recently started to sort of work with sort of some businesses, mostly in the US at the time of writing or talking, where we offered advice and given them examples of the things they can do to celebrate their kind of own anniversaries. But I thought, seeing as I'm based here in York, and and obviously there's lots of organisations, businesses, not-for-profit groups here in York, all of whom will at some point have an anniversary which they'll want to mark in some way, that I and the rest of my team probably have the most expertise in the world in terms of how organizations have marked these events. So we're basically here to offer any advice or tips or examples of how to do these things well, or kind of things to avoid. So yeah, cheers.